Lesson 7 of EVOC. In this lesson, we'll talk about some basic ambulance driving and normal operations. Remember, in this course, we're not going to do any high-speed or evasive maneuvering. I know it'll be a lot of fun, but we don't get to try to flip the ambulance over, sorry. So take a look at this one. If you think about it, got a team in the back. Generally, it's just going to be your partner, but if you have one or two or however many people are back there, they're not going to be able to do their job if they're holding on for dear life because they're scared you're trying to kill them by your driving. So if you can drive smoother, slower, and more cautiously, they can actually focus on what they're doing. Now, hopefully, we are changing ambulance designs, and in the future, this won't be as big of a deal, but right now, we just don't have a real good layout in the back. I generally try to do everything I can on scene and then seatbelt myself in. Not so much that my partner is a bad driver, but I just never know what the public's going to do if somebody's going to pull out in front of us, and I don't want to have to get thrown around. But anything we're doing as far as driving can make our patient much worse. And remember, they're facing backwards, so they don't even get to see what's coming. And oftentimes, I believe that the person driving the ambulance actually does more for pain management, for things like abdominal pain and broken bones, than I would do as a paramedic giving pain medicine. Anytime we transition from one surface to another, I don't care what it is, there's going to be a little bit of a bump there. Asphalt, we worry about it in the summer months when it gets real hot because then the oils start to come out and it gets a little slick, especially immediately after it rains for about the first 30 minutes or so. Concrete is good. They have to build it in pads or sections. Just the way concrete is, you have to allow for some expansion and contraction. So you end up with these 10 to 20 foot pads that you kind of line up, and if they don't get those things lined up just properly, there's a big bump between each section, and you've probably driven down some roads that have that, and you kind of get a ka-thump, 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 ka-thump as you go through each or over each section, each transition. Dirt and gravel, obviously, you're not going to have as good a traction, so you need to be a little more careful there. And if you're looking at the picture of this dirt road, you don't really see where the potholes are until you're nearly on top of them. So that's another concern with dirt and gravel roads. You know you're having a bad day when the football team has to push your ambulance out of the mud. We're going to talk about each of these conditions, but there is one thing I want to mention with the picture here, is a lot of times we will try to pull up into somebody's, maybe their front yard, or try to get close to their door or their back door or something, especially if it's been rainy and wet and all that, because we don't want them to get too wet. I want you to think about septic tanks, though. Don't have to worry about it in the city, but when you're out in the county, they may have their septic tank not that far away from their door, and if you drive out over that, the weight of the ambulance may collapse it, and then you got a real mess. So be careful where you're driving into people's yards. With a curve, we want to think NASCAR, and the inside of the bank is lower. This allows us to use that centrifugal force to kind of push us against the road, and we're less likely to skip or slide off the road. Most roads are built this way. The only one I can think of right now, and they may fix it soon, they're supposed to repave it, is Cox Boulevard heading southbound. There's one curve kind of by Shoals Hospital where it's banked lower on the outside, and that creates some issues when people come around that corner too fast. Now the crown of the road is this here, and the greater the crown, if you could make it like that, the water would drain off even faster, but obviously you couldn't drive on something like that. Now roadside engineering is all stuff on the side of the road that kind of warns us of what is coming up. And it might be the guardrails, it's the signs, it's all the stuff to warn you about what's about to happen. And if the speed limit is saying 25 miles per hour, you probably need to do that in the ambulance, just because we're a little bit more top heavy, we're a little bit bigger and heavier than the average vehicle, so you'll want to follow that posted speed limit even on the yellow signs. You're supposed to anyways. Now I know might be a little bit hard to see, but right in there's a dark spot. And you should have seen my wife and I driving around trying to find a picture, or trying to find a dark spot that I get a good picture of. But what that means is there is a bump somewhere right before that. So if you look right here, you'll see that there's a transition. So every car that hits that transition or that bump has dirt and grease and oil and stuff knocked off the bottom of it. And that makes for a dark spot just beyond where the bump is. So as you're driving along, if you see a dark spot in the middle of the road, you can usually think that there is a bump or a pothole or something before that dark spot that you have to watch out for. We've never seen anything like this happen here in Alabama. We're driving along and somebody's yard maybe isn't manicured like we all want it to be, and they have a bunch of mud and it flows out over the road. Just realize that mud on that road is very slick, so you're going to take your foot off the accelerator before you get to it, and just sort of coast through it. Don't apply your brakes as you're going through the mud, because that'll cause you to skid and slide. Now, if you have a little tree branch like that falls down in front of you, if you have time, great, slow down, stop, try to go around it. We do that if possible. But if it falls down immediately in front of you, that's a small enough branch that I'm just going to run it over. Bit of a bump. Might try to yell at my partner that we're about to have a bump, but I just run it over. Now you got a tree branch like that, that's a little bit different. We're definitely going to have to stop. If you can't stop, you're going to be doing a lot of paperwork. So, as I said earlier, patients with abdominal pain, patients with a broken arm or leg that are being tossed around in the back of the ambulance, that can really make their condition worse. So trying to make it as smooth a drive as possible is what we're shooting for here. And generally, the slower the ride, the smoother the ride. Also, the left-hand lane versus the right-hand lane, or the inside lane versus the outside lane, is a little bit smoother. And the other thing you don't want to have happen is our equipment. And I know I harp on it a lot, but we need to have our equipment properly secured, and we need to have fasteners for everything and not just bungee corded in somewhere. We need to have proper placement for all of our equipment. If we don't have it strapped down properly, it can easily get tossed off of a shelf or something. And most of the equipment isn't a big deal, but you're dealing with a cardiac monitor there that probably weighs 40 pounds, and if that comes flying off a shelf and hits the patient in the head or hit your partner in the head, you can cause severe injuries, if not kill someone with it. That would be kind of cool if we could learn to drive an ambulance on its side like that. We won't get to do that, so sorry if you were excited when you saw that picture. We don't get to do that. But we do need to be able to corner smoothly. We need to be able to slow down and stop smoothly and maintain an even speed, so you're not speeding up, slowing down, and causing your partner to have to shift and adjust and get tossed around to the back. No, we don't get to go jumping in the ambulance either, though I know there are a few intersections here in Florence that you can hit at the right speeds and get airborne in your ambulance. At least that's what I'm told. But the idea with the suspension system is that we keep all the wheels on the ground. If we have all the wheels on the ground, we can better brake and corner and stop and all that. And hopefully it protects or isolates everybody from all the bumps and all that in the road. But I will tell you now that you will be riding up front and it feels okay, but in the back it's terrible. It's always 10 times worse in the back of an ambulance than it is the front of an ambulance. And I don't understand why we can't build an ambulance that is smooth. We just haven't been able to do that yet. Centrifugal force, and if you want to argue with a physicist about whether this really exists or not, you can. But it's the force that we kind of feel as we go around a corner and it pushes us out. And remember, this is why it's better to have the inside of the curve banked lower than the outside of the curve, so you don't go sliding off the road. But as you're going around corners, we're definitely feeling it in the back, and we may not have a chance to adjust to that if you curve or take a curve too quickly. So this total stopping distance, once you imagine you're driving down the road and you see a ball bounce out in front of you, and of course you know immediately after the ball there's a kid. So a photon of light bounces off this kid, travels through the air, goes through your windshield, into your retina, or through your iris into your retina. Your retina then changes that to an electrical signal. That electrical signal travels down your optic nerve and goes into your brain, and your brain interprets that as the kid in front of you in the road. And then it has an OS moment, and then sends an electrical signal down to your foot to take your foot off of the accelerator and move it to the brake and to start applying the brake. All that is your reaction time. And that's a lot that happens, and it takes about a quarter of a second. And in that quarter of a second, depending on how fast you were going, you obviously went down the road. Now, braking time, that is going to be dependent on how heavy the vehicle is, how good the brakes are. Do you have some sort of anti-lock braking system? But that braking time probably is the majority of the stopping distance. But the total stopping distance is how fast you can react, and then how long it takes for the ambulance to slow down. So we try to use this 2-4-12 rule to give us enough room and give us a bit of a safety cushion where we can slow down at a decent or over a decent time instead of just having to slam on the brakes. So we're going below 55 miles an hour, we're looking ahead of us, and we're at least 2 seconds behind the car in front of us. So we have about a 2-second gap between the two vehicles. And if you're not sure how to do this, when the car in front of you passes a street sign or a light pole or a mark in the road, you start counting and go 1 1,000, 2 1,000. If you have reached that same spot in less than 2 seconds, you need to back off a little bit, you're tailgating. Now we get a little bit faster, we're going above 55 miles an hour. You want to bring that up to 4 seconds, so there's a longer space between you and the car in front of you. Now regardless, you're always looking 12 seconds down the road. So you may be just 2 seconds or 4 seconds behind the car in front of you, but you're looking further down the road than that to kind of anticipate what's happening. So when you see light changes, you can slow down before you get there. You see debris in the road, you can change lanes, you got a lane closure, to get over, whatever it is, you're looking down the road. I worked with a partner in Killen for a while who drove an 18-wheeler. I think he delivered cars. And he was one of the best ambulance drivers I've ever had, because he was able to look down the road at least 12 seconds and anticipate things. So when he saw a light turning red, he'd take his foot off the accelerator, wouldn't even have to put it on the brake, and we would generally be slowed down, and the light would turn green again before we got there, and then he could speed back up. So I never really felt a real jar of having to stop hard or anything, because he was just always looking down the road so far. And he was excellent at it. Now, I don't want you to think that means you don't ever have to stop, because sometimes you do still have to stop at a red light or a stop sign, no matter how far you're looking down the road. But if we're looking down the road, hopefully we can anticipate what's ahead, and we won't have to slam on the brakes. Now, this reaction time, if you're tired, if you're sick, if you're on some medications for something, all those things can cause your reaction time to slow down. So instead of it taking a quarter second, maybe it takes a half a second, or maybe even a full second for you to get your foot off the accelerator and put it on the brake, which means your vehicle traveled that much further. Now, none of those things are going to affect the stopping distance of the vehicle, but it will affect your reaction time. So if we're using the 2-4-12 rule, we should be looking down the road, we should be anticipating, and we should be able to speed up our reaction time a little bit and stop a little bit faster. The faster we travel, typically the bumpier it's going to be and the harder it is on everybody in the back. So if we slow it down, it'll be a smoother ride and everybody's happy. And this is true, but it's almost impossible to fully implement. Most of the wrecks that we encounter or we are involved with are preventable. Somebody made a mistake somewhere, somebody did something stupid. And this is why autonomous vehicles or automatic driving vehicles are going to be such a good thing for us, because we've pretty much shown that humans, although they do a decent job driving, are really stupid about a lot of things, like trying to drink and drive, or eat and drive, or apply makeup and drive, or shave and drive, or text and drive, or watch TV and drive. I know one person that I used to work with who actually had a VCR back when there were VCRs hooked up to a little portable screen in his car so he could watch movies as he drove to work. Just not very bright. So in the old days, we used to respond to MVAs, motor vehicle accidents, and we decided to change the word from accident to crash or collision. So now we run MVCs. And we did that because we didn't want people to think that these accidents or these collisions actually were accidental and nobody had anything that they could do about it. It was just purely an accident. And that's not true, because almost all of them are preventable. So some things you want to do, and this is stuff you should be doing in your own car right now, because the way you drive your car is the way you're going to drive the ambulance. So we are driving cautiously, we're keeping our eyes on the road, we're not texting and driving, or eating and driving, or fiddling with the radio, or whatever we're doing. But we're focusing on our driving. We have an idea of what's going on around us and how many cars are next to us, in front of us, behind us. So we have some sort of a plan in mind of what to do if something happens, like if somebody slams on the brakes in front of you. Do you have enough time to stop? If you're using your 2-4-12 rule, you should. Or do you need to swerve to one side or the other? I hate that expect the unexpected. That's just dumb. But drive your car safely, and the more practice you do, or the better you do with your car, typically the better we will be doing with our ambulance. That being said, not everybody else on the road is going to be a good driver, so you have to kind of anticipate that some people are not going to do what they're supposed to do. So again, stay alert, know what's going on around the ambulance. I had one guy when I first started, he would sit in the passenger seat and we'd be driving down the road and then he'd suddenly yell at you, "How many cars are behind you?" And you had to quickly look, but the idea was you were supposed to know that without having to look in the mirrors. Again, driving slowly, use your 2-4-12 rule, have everything secured in the ambulance, you have your doors locked, you have your seatbelt on. All that is defensive driving. And just not being aggressive when you drive. Drive cautiously. And politely. Be nice. This safety cushion. One of my really, really big pet peeves is somebody always seems to like to drive like right next to me as I'm going down the road. And sometimes I understand. It's like Woodward Avenue. There's 1,000 cars in a 2-block area. You can't avoid it. But why right next to me when there is plenty of room? Speed up, slow down so you're not right next to a vehicle, so that way you can go to the left or right if you needed to. We do want to stay back. It's much more common nowadays for us to have multiple vehicles going to the same scene. Police are going there, the fire department's going there, we're going there, and sometimes our stations are close together, so the fire department may take off and we just get behind the fire truck and kind of follow them. So now we are a multiple responding unit. And the problem with this is people are anticipating the first vehicle. They hear the fire truck coming. They watch the fire truck go through the intersection and think, "Ooh, isn't that pretty fire truck?" And they start pulling out. And what they're not anticipating is a second vehicle, which is us. So they pull out in front of us. If people are tailgating you, and some people are doing this to try to get through traffic faster, they feel they can get to wherever they're going if they turn on their hazards and pretend like they're family members and just ride right behind us, which is really dangerous. You're going to have to slow down. You may have to stop. You can use your radio to radio into dispatch and ask for police to come arrest them or ticket them, and they will do that. Now, when we're not in emergency mode, remember, 500 feet is how far we're supposed to be behind another emergency vehicle. But again, that's only emergency mode. In emergency, it's not a bad idea, but we can get closer because we have an exemption. Now, I know it sometimes seems a little strange to be communicating with other drivers, but we are. As we pull up to the intersection, you're making eye contact with them, so they know that you know that they know that they're there and you're there and all that, however you want to word it. But anyways, you see that they've stopped, you see that they've acknowledged you, and now we can proceed through the intersection. Our lights and our sirens hopefully let them know that we're there, and they will yield the right of way for us. All we're doing with our lights and sirens is asking for it. They have to yield it to us. We can use our regular horn or air horn to give some toots to try to attract attention. We do that occasionally. Hand signals, make sure you're using all your fingers, not just one. I've had several incidents where people have been written up or sometimes just fired because they were being stupid and didn't do or were being impolite with their hand signals as they were going down the road in the ambulance. Even with all of our best driving habits, we may have a wreck. Sometimes even with our best defensive driving, something's going to happen and we may wreck. So we're going to anticipate that may happen. Don't want it to happen. Hopefully never will happen, but it might. So make sure you have your seatbelt on. Make sure you have your doors locked so you're less likely to be ejected. And this good housekeeping habits, make sure everything is secured from the clipboard to the tough book to the oxygen cylinders to the monitor to everything has its place and everything is secured in the ambulance. I used to, let me start with this first. If we realize we're going to hit something, I want to try and slow down as much as possible so there's less damage to everything. If I could avoid a head-on collision and maybe hit a glancing blow, that would be better. Or if a T-bone, maybe I can hit it at an angle. So instead of it being a pure T-bone, maybe I can hit something at an angle and kind of glance off and it won't be as bad. And then if I have to pick between two things, I want to pick the softer of the two things to hit. So if I had to pick between the big, huge oak trees and the corn, I'm going to take the corn. I used to show a picture of a hedge and a picture of a brick wall. And everybody always picked the brick wall. And I'm thinking, man, that's dumb. Why would you hit a brick wall? And class after class after class would say, oh, they didn't want to hit the hedge because there might be kids on the other side of it. So I had to change the pictures to the oak tree and the corn. So if you are saying you want to pick the oak trees because you're worried there are children in the corn, then we have other issues if you're worried about children of the corn. In fact, you might want to run over the children of the corn. If you haven't seen that movie, you'll get it when you watch it. So some other things we do, obviously we need to stop, we need to accelerate and start. We're going to have to change lanes and go around vehicles. We have to back up, and we have to do some turning. These are all basic skills that you should already know how to do in your regular vehicle. To get ready for the driving part of this, Module B, you might want to get as big a vehicle as you can and try doing these things, especially the backing. So as we're having to come to a stop, we want to press our brakes firmly. And if it's a long stop, like down a long hill, you may want to pump them a little bit. The more heat there is, or the hotter it is outside, the longer it's going to take you to stop because your brakes have to absorb that heat. You want to be looking to the left and right to see if maybe you can swerve to the left or right and avoid whatever's in front of you. Hopefully, if you were looking 12 seconds down the road, though, you saw what the objects were and were able to stop in plenty of time. You're making a lane change, you want to be planning ahead, so you're looking, and when you see it's clear, about 3 to 5 seconds before you make your lane change, you're going to turn on your turn signal. And then you let that blink for a few seconds, and then you slowly move over, and you can go around the vehicle. Make sure you turn your turn signal back off. Otherwise, you look like an old person driving around with their turn signal on all the time. Now, if we have to pass someone and go around them, and sometimes we have to do this in emergency mode, they slow down or they stop and we have to go around. Again, make sure the lanes are clear. Now, this time we have to make sure that there's nobody coming directly at us, so there's nobody coming that way. Put your turn signal on. When it's clear, you go around them, signal back to the right, and then go to the right. Now, if you're in emergency mode, remember we can go pretty much whatever speed we want, whatever our protocols allow us to go. If we're not in emergency mode, you can't exceed the speed limit. You don't have an exemption when you're just driving around. So don't do this often unless the person in front of you is just driving very slowly. If you wait until you get really close to the car in front of you and you try this, as soon as they realize you're behind them and they look up and about all they can see is like the B and U of ambulance, they're going to panic, especially if you have your lights and sirens going, and they're just going to slam on their brakes. So then you'll run over them, and that's not cool. Backing. 85% of our one vehicle crashes involve backing. So that should be a big hint that we should do something about this. Now, if I had my way, I'd probably invent something like maybe a small camera that I could put on the back of the ambulance and then route it to a little screen on the front of the ambulance so you can kind of see what's behind you. And I'd probably come up with some creative name like backup camera. It amazes me that we have these for our cars. I was being sarcastic. We have these for our cars, but we don't have them for our ambulances yet. We're getting them, but man, we should have had these years ago. Would have saved a lot of backup problems. But because most of our ambulances don't have a backup camera, we use our partner, and that's a ground guide. Now, this is great when you're pulling up on scene or when you're at the station or you're at a restaurant. This is not good when you're trying to leave the scene or when you're backing in at the hospital because your partner has to take care of the patient. So sometimes on scene we can get a first responder, firefighter, police officer that can help us be a ground guide, but not always. So you still have to back up occasionally without somebody back there. Although for testing purposes, always use a ground guide when you're backing up. You have to use your side mirrors. The rear view mirror really isn't any good for backing. About all you can see at the back of the ambulance, the patient compartment, so you can see what your partner and your patient are up to. Do this very slowly, and it's not a bad idea before you back up as you're loading the patient to see what's back there and get a mental image of where everything is so you don't back into mailboxes or posts or trees or cars or fire trucks or whatever else is back there. So straight line backing shouldn't be that hard as long as you know it's clear, because if you keep your hands still, you should back up in a straight line. If you start to turn your hands left or right, and you start to curve or bend the ambulance or turn the ambulance, then it's going to be harder to recover and keep going straight. So just hold your hands still. Now backing while turning, the problem with this is as the ambulance starts to come around as we're backing up, we have to watch this front corner because it will go that direction. And if there is an object right in the way, like let's say maybe there's a tree next to your ambulance or a bush, you will run over that. So you have to watch the front and the back. So as you're turning, make sure you monitor that front end as you're using your side mirrors to watch for what's behind you. Do this slowly. Urban driving, so driving around in a city. We have plenty of traffic around here, but it's not really like big city, downtown, things like Birmingham, Atlanta, Nashville. The big buildings that they have there sometimes are very close to the road. There's just a little bit of a sidewalk between the road and the building. So we can't bounce our lights around them, and our siren doesn't really go around them. So the people coming in from the left and the right don't see us that well. And we have just a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of intersections and a lot of driveways and things coming out of buildings and parking lots that traffic's entering from all directions. And typically in city limits or urban driving, there's a lot more people walking around. You got to watch out for pedestrians. Now, rural driving, there's other hazards there. People are out doing their bike rides, trying to be in shape, and you have possibility of cows and livestock getting loose and being on the road, or just deer. A lot of deer that we hit. There are some kids out playing. There can be that slow tractor or somebody else on their ATV or something going slowly. But I want to mention school buses specifically, because when that stop sign is out, we are not allowed to go around them. We do not have that exemption. So what I recommend when you pull up at a school bus or behind a school bus that has its lights going and stop sign out is just stop. Turn off your lights and sirens, shut it all down, and just let things happen. The kids will disembark, they'll go where they're supposed to. When things are clear, the school bus driver will turn off the lights, will pull in the stop sign, and at that point in time you can turn things back on and go around them. Because otherwise the kids are watching you, and they're watching the lights, and they think it's exciting and it's cool as they're crossing the road, and they're not looking to see if it's safe. So let them cross, let them get where they need to go, and then we can take off. The amount of time that you wait on this is pretty minimal. Now, for whatever reason, cars seem to like to stop right about there. And, of course, the problem with them stopping right there is we can't see around them. So I have to go around them somehow, but I don't know what's coming over that hill. So sometimes we kind of creep up on them, and hopefully they'll get over the top of the hill and we can see. Otherwise, we just have to go very, very, very slowly. And again, cars are built pretty soundproof nowadays. They might not realize you're back there until you're almost on top of them, and then you slam on the brakes and you run into them. So make sure you're not too close. When we're driving down the interstate, of course, when we're not lights and sirens, we're not in emergency mode, we're just following the speed limit. So we're doing 65 like everybody else, I'm sure, is doing on the interstate. But if you are running an emergency, our siren is almost useless. We call it out driving our siren or over driving our siren. You're going so fast down the road that your siren just doesn't project far in front of you. Now, you're not driving faster than the speed of sound, I know that, but it's just not able to project far in front of you. And cars nowadays are built so well, so soundproof, that it's just really hard to see. And during the day, the lights are more difficult to see, so they may not even realize you're running lights and sirens until you're past them. At night, still won't hear you, but at least the lights, the strobes especially, will show up well, and hopefully they'll see you and get out of your way. So, all right, again, any questions, shoot me a message in Moodle, and I'll get them answered for you. Thank you.